Jim Clark had been the last of the great gentleman drivers who raced for the love of the sport and the pleasure of driving, with no great eye for personal gain. Jackie Stewart, who would succeed him, knew him well.
Only in his last year did he really develop as a personality in himself, and only late in his career did he have any real confidence, or did he recognise his real superiority as a driver. So he was really a contradiction to the modern Grand Prix driver. He was entering a period of his life where he would have had to change enormously, and I'm not sure he would have been prepared to do that.
Thus ended the romantic era of racing. In 1968, the age of sponsorship would begin. One Scot, Jackie Stewart, succeeded another, Jim Clark. The character and temperament of these two drivers were very different. It was as much because of his professionalism as his talent on the track that helped Jackie Stewart become the dominant driver of his era.
Today the sport gets to a much wider public because companies who are using motor racing to attract attention to their products have gone out, have advertised, have projected motor racing to a new group of people. Motor racing used to be a very small interest group. Today, the whole world knows about motor racing.
Stewart's career may have taken off in 1968 thanks to his association with the arms manufacturer turned racing car constructor Matra, but his success was also strongly allied to Team Tyrrell, in whose colours he raced almost throughout his career. But this was a partnership that was somewhat different to the Clark-Chapman duo. There may have been less genius influence, perhaps less bravery and panache, but there may equally have been more discipline, order and down-to-earth efficiency. Stewart was always very conscious of the risks he ran in racing and relied only on his team patron to guarantee the safety and reliability of his cars, just as the pair would plan the best tactical and strategic options for a race. The effectiveness of this partnership became apparent when they won the 1969 championship. From that moment on, Stewart was considered as one of the great drivers in the sport thanks to his professional and intelligent approach and his precise style. He was certainly professional, but he also loved car racing.
Well, I think a racing car is something very special, almost in the breed of an animal. Not only is it like an animal, but it's also like a woman. It's very sensitive, it's very nervous, it's very highly strung. Sometimes it responds very nicely, sometimes it responds very viciously. Sometimes, to get the best out of it, you have to coax it and almost caress it to do the things you want it to do. And even after you've done all these things, and the car is doing exactly as you want it to do, it will immediately and with no warning change its mind and do something very suddenly, very abruptly.
No amount of brilliance could transform some cars, however, and the average march that Stewart drove in 1970 wasn't sufficient to retain the title. But Stewart and Tyrrell learnt from the experience. Tyrrell decided to build his own cars, and it was a wise decision. He and Stewart won titles in 1971 and 1973. Stewart was at his peak. However, he wasn't entirely satisfied, for he was campaigning for an improvement in the safety arrangements at circuits, and that earned him numerous critics. Little by little, the idea of retirement would become more and more attractive, as did the idea of a protégé. That's how he became the mentor of his teammate François Sévère, an association marked by friendship in a sport which more often generates rivalry.
The next big long one, if you gear it for third gear, where else will you use third gear?
Just there, because if you go around this double right, you have to put third between this and the S's.
With 3 world titles and 27 victories, Stewart, encouraged by his wife Helen, decided to retire at the end of the 1973 season. But it only took place in the most tragic of circumstances.
I suppose I had been involved in many motor racing accidents, had seen many people die, and have certainly lost many friends. But Francois' accident really was the last straw. It was the last thing that could happen to me really in motor racing.
Give the car, it's not a nice impression, you know. See, all vibration. It's not
Sever was killed in practice for the final race of the year, the American Grand Prix. Devastated, Stewart quit the sport without even taking part in what would have been the 100th and final race of his career. In so doing, he proved himself to be anything but the grasping professional and the snivelling apostle of safety which his enemies had unjustly accused him of being. The man who took up his mantle was Niki Lauda. This Austrian was even further removed from the romantic ideal of the past than Stewart. Distant, sometimes sarcastic, he had a Germanic obsession with efficiency. After a laboured initiation to the sport, Lauda overcame his lack of natural talent by dedicating himself to demonstrating that the right approach and hard work would always pay dividends. He joined Ferrari in 1974, when they were at an all-time low, but he brought to this most Latin of teams the kind of discipline that they lacked. Having galvanized the various departments within the Scuderia, he then helped them to their most successful period in racing. They came close to winning the title in 1974, but succeeded the following year, ending a 7-year run for cars powered by Ford's V8 Cosworth. Lauda was on course for more of the same in 1976, when his Ferrari got away from him in the German Grand Prix. Badly burnt, he courageously returned to the cockpit 6 weeks later at Monza, but he was scarcely fit. In his absence, James Hunt had gained on Lauda in the championship and was now almost level.
When you have an accident like mine, I was running on reserve already, I would say the last 4 races, because I was nearly dead and it was not easy that year. So I came on reserve into a race where the conditions needed a strong man with all the reserves for this difficult decision to say, today it rains, I don't care, I'm still strong and I'm go for it. And then the condition got more and more difficult. So therefore I said, I'm too weak to take this extra with rain. So I said, no way. I was unlucky that after 15-20 minutes of terrible racing, the rain stopped. So, okay, I lost the championship. But I think the decision at that time was right and I would do it again.
In a downpour at Fuji, the last round of the series, Lauda, still not fully recovered from his voyage to hell and back, pulled out, unhappy with the conditions, and he lost the title. But he had his revenge the next year and won the title that was justifiably his. But he'd been badly hurt by Ferrari, who had doubted whether he could be as competitive as before and had hastily signed Carlos Reutemann, whom Lauda didn't want as a teammate. No sooner had he won the title than he quit the Italian team.
If you come to the point where you come to a team and you see always the same faces and the same spaghettis and whatever, it's a pure, normal human reaction that sometime in life you feel for a change. Nothing against the Ferrari people. The main reason was simply that I was ready for a change.
The cunning Bernie Ecclestone wasn't about to let the reigning world champion pass him by, and Lauda found himself driving for Brabham. But the cars were outclassed by the ground effect Lotuses, and Lauda was up against the talented Brazilian newcomer Nelson Piquet in his own team. Lauda admitted that he had lost vital motivation, and right in the middle of the first day of practice for the 1979 Canadian Grand Prix, Lauda walked out with scarcely a word of explanation or goodbye. It was an exit totally in character with the casual temperament of a man to whom sentiment meant little. But his substitute was already primed.
Bon, il y a un truc qu'il faut essayer, enfin que je voudrais essayer si on a le temps, c'est jouer sur les amortisseurs et sur la barre avant.
Je vais te demander, tu n'as pas du tout de pompage là?
Non, pas du tout.
Parce que René il pompe comme une vache.
Pas du tout.
Formula One was changing. The turbo era was in its youth, led by the Renault Elf team, of which Alain Prost was the #1 driver. Prost's motor racing apprenticeship had been rapid and successful, racing school to Formula One in 5 years. His first Grand Prix victory came at the French at Dijon in 1981. It was the first of an extraordinary series of wins which is unrivaled in the history of Grand Prix. Prost was one of a new generation of drivers who had cut their teeth in karting and racing schools. He had natural class and style allied to a sixth sense in racing and a talent at setting up a car. It made for an exceptional driver. His calm, fluid driving style, at the same time hard and forceful, made him one of the most brilliant in the sport. He hated to lose, which meant that he won races which sometimes seemed lost, such as the 1982 South African Grand Prix, which also marked the return of Lauda to racing after 4 years of retirement. It was an event that was as expected as controversial.
Est-ce que vous croyez à la réussite de Niki Lauda?
Ça dépend ce qu'on entend par réussite. Si réussite veut dire gagner tous les Grands Prix et être champion du monde, non, pas, mais à ce qui marche bien, à ce qu'il soit compétitif, oui.
Il y a une chose qui est sûre, c'est que je lui souhaite de réussir parce que son retour est très courageux. Je l'ai approuvé dès le début, donc je peux que lui souhaiter une grande réussite. Et de toute façon, me battre contre un pilote de sa trempe, ce ne sera qu'un honneur pour moi si je le bats, mais je lui souhaite bonne chance en tout cas.
These were ironic words for Prost. 2 years later, he would find himself teammate to Niki at McLaren. The confrontation between the old and new number ones seemed particularly pertinent and lively. Up against the young lion, who had virtually only driven turbo cars, the old hand had to readjust his driving style. It wasn't easy. But he used all his cold cunning and intelligence. He may not have been able to match Prost on pure speed alone, but he still had the odd card up his sleeve. He exploited his own racing experience and one or two of the mistakes due to the inexperience of his young rival to just head home his teammate by a nose after a thrilling race for the title. Just half a point separated the two after an unforgettable 1984 Portuguese Grand Prix. Lauda had won his third title after an historic comeback.
I'm most proud, I think, of '84, where after 10 years competitive Formula One racing, I still won the race or the championship by half a point over Prost, because it was hard. There was the young generation trying to blow me off, and it did work. So I can say for 10 years with up and downs, I kept going upwards. I think this was the most difficult thing.
Prost would learn quickly. He learnt all he could from being so close to a professional as methodical and experienced as Lauda. The Austrian had shown him how to assume the position of number one, to get the team behind him, to leave nothing to chance, to spare his car and himself, to help his engineers get the best out of the car.
Because of his natural talent, he doesn't have to force it to achieve the performance, and therefore he always has a little bit left, and this gives him the capability of operating within himself, and therefore he is never stretched.
Consequently, in 1985, the roles were reversed. The newly nicknamed Professor used his recently acquired science to good advantage and turned the tables on his teammate. Prost would become the first French Formula One world champion in the history of the sport at the end of the European Grand Prix at Brands Hatch on October the 6th, 1985. The new number one was a perfectionist and a tireless worker. He would turn out to be more Latin than his predecessor, particularly in his relationship with a racing car.
Ma voiture, j'ai l'impression de toujours faire corps avec. Je sais pas comment dire, c'est pas comme une personne, comme un être humain, mais c'est quelque chose de très dangereux. Mais j'essaye de la dominer, mais c'est souvent elle qui me domine. Et on a une relation un petit peu bizarre ensemble, mais pour moi, c'est un bijou.
But Prost had basically become a talented and, above all, tactical driver, which earned him his second World Championship title in 1986, in spite of a less competitive car than the Williams Honda. For while Mansell and Piquet lost points to one another in their pointless race against one another for the title, the cunning and determined Prost used what he had to its greatest advantage. A thrilling final round in Australia saw him come from behind and take the title from his two rivals. He was unquestionably the champion of the turbo era, the 80s, during which he averaged 4 wins per year. That was twice as many as either Piquet or Senna, the next most successful drivers of the decade. He took 2 consecutive titles in 1985 and 1986, then lost out to the mounting power of the Williams Hondas and Ferraris. But he was still able to salvage the odd victory, such as his record-breaking 28th victory in Portugal, surpassing Jackie Stewart's record.
C'était le type de course où on doute jamais, où on sait que normalement tout doit aller très bien jusqu'au dernier tour. Même quand j'étais deuxième derrière Berger et qu'il restait peu de tours, je pensais que soit j'allais le rattraper doublé, soit il allait faire une faute. J'étais vraiment très confiant.
Berger, pushed hard by Prost, had to give best with just a few laps to go.
J'étais sur 2 titres de champion du monde, 85-86. 87 était une saison moyenne avec simplement 2 victoires avant celle-ci et beaucoup de problèmes de moteur, donc on était un peu frustrés, toute l'équipe. Et cette course, c'était, je crois, comme un championnat, peut-être même plus.
Piquet took the championship again in 1987, but in 1988, Honda took their powerful engines away from Williams to McLaren. That alone wasn't enough to guarantee Prost the title again. He may have been able to count on the best car and engine combination in the field, but he had to cope with a rival, and a dangerous one because he had the same equipment, his own teammate.
Il y a 2 sortes de concurrents. Il y a l'adversaire qui est dans une autre équipe et il y a le coéquipier qui est aussi lui un concurrent. Et c'est souvent celui-là le plus redoutable, car c'est la seule, c'est les talons.
That teammate was Ayrton Senna, the rising star, and the partnership with Prost at McLaren turned from being a duo to a duel. Unlike Lauda, who knew that his career was in its twilight, Prost refused to accept that he wasn't as quick as the newcomer, and what followed was a merciless battle which ended by turning sour. After Senna took the title in 1988, Prost took his revenge in 1989, following a tangle between the 2 teammates at Suzuka, a disputed situation which saw Prost leave the team. But he found a well-paid home at Ferrari, where he was welcomed as the Messiah. They'd been chasing the world title in vain for 10 years. The Frenchman came close to taking the title to Maranello in 1990, but his hopes were dashed by another collision with Senna at Suzuka. The Brazilian later admitted that he had purposefully hit the Frenchman in revenge for the previous year's accident. Sacked by Ferrari in 1991, Prost temporarily quit the sport and left Senna to claim the title of undisputed #1. Senna was the latest in the Brazilian line of world champions, preceded by Emerson Fittipaldi and Nelson Piquet. He came to everyone's notice at the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix, when he fought through the field in pouring rain, driving the relatively uncompetitive Toleman, and all but overtook Prost when the race was stopped. Snapped up by Lotus, the obviously talented Senna rapidly established himself as the new force in motorsport. What made this fanatical perfectionist even more special was his constant quest for the ultimate performance, remarkable vision and relentless determination.
Unless I have a feeling that I'm giving my very best, I don't feel happy. And in order I can give my very best, I have to concentrate, I have to work hard, and I have to push all the time myself and the people that are working around me to improve and to be better.
First of all, he became the all-time #1 in the pursuit of pole positions. Nobody knew quite how to get the best out of the super sticky but short-lived qualifying tyres like Senna, nor how to clear the track of traffic to give him a clean run. Added to these talents was a mysterious personality, and the combination was sometimes worrying, sometimes frightening. Senna's first Grand Prix victory came in Portugal in 1985, his second season, and as a result of a remarkable drive in soaking conditions as at Monaco a year earlier. Such was his car control and supremacy above all others that some nicknamed him Magic that day. The strength of his powers of analysis, his nerve and his confidence have all contributed to his remarkable results.
il a un talent naturel énorme, il a l'intelligence, il a la jeunesse, il a la sensibilité pour les réglages, que ce soit moteur, que ce soit châssis. Je pense qu'il a vraiment tout ce qu'il faut pour être champion du monde. Il sera champion du monde.
In 1988, Senna joined McLaren alongside Prost, who hitherto had been unrivaled since Lauda's departure. This was his home ground. The Brazilian would have to intrude to establish himself in the new team. But apart from his remarkable qualities, Senna came with one more specific asset: the loyalty that his perfectionism had instilled in the Honda mechanics since his days at Lotus. The Japanese engineers were great fans. No one else spent so much time with them, helping them understand and in turn helping them to conquer the world of Formula One. That year remains in the annals of Formula One as an incredible one. Statistically, the McLaren pair came close to a Grand Slam. They won 15 Grand Prix out of 16. 10 times they finished first and second, 6 more than the previous record. Such dominance suggests a very tedious season, but it was far from that. In fact, it was one of the most lively ever. Prost and Senna almost took turns at winning in their fascinating battle, as though they were following a script. The Frenchman had the best start to the year and equalled his own record of 7 victories. But the Brazilian would equal that and then score one more, winning the championship in the face of his more senior colleague in his first season with the team. It was a remarkable feat, but according to Senna, just one step on the way to his holy grail.
There is a big difference between winning a championship or being a true champion. Every year there is a winner, but not every year there is a champion.
In truth, the new world champion had been affected by a psychological war that Prost had waged against him in order to destabilize him.
What can disturb the image of a champion is polemics and antagonism coming from people who cannot accept being defeated and trying to find excuses when they lose instead of recognizing that they have been beaten. That can make a lot of distortion.
Prost was a past master in the art of manipulating the media and had instigated a campaign to suggest that his team favored the other driver at his expense. And Senna, with a touch of the spoilt child, was attempting to get his own back in the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix with a risky overtaking maneuver, only to find Prost slamming the door, and not very well. All hell broke loose. While blame could be attributed to both drivers, Senna became the scapegoat. He was disqualified and didn't simply lose the championship, but also his dignity. He was mortified, certain that he was the victim of a conspiracy and consequently set out on a futile crusade against the governing body. But these events, far from undermining his confidence, actually strengthened it. Having been accused of dangerous driving in 1990, this time he treated his critics with scorn. And he got his own back on Prost the following year by turfing him off the track at Suzuka and taking the championship. Just revenge for what he regarded as similar treatment suffered a year before, which had cost him the title.
I have had great races in my career, fortunately. But I'm still looking for my best one in the future.
Senna would go on to win a 3rd title in 1991, and he could go on to equal, if not beat, the magnificent record of 5 titles won by Fangio. But there will be plenty of young drivers trying to beat him. Who will be the legendary drivers of the future?